Vanessa Reeves had mastered the art of reading people. Boardrooms, negotiations, hostile takeovers. But sitting at gate 23, watching her daughter's hands move in quick, graceful patterns, she realized she'd been missing an entire conversation. Ruby was signing something, not the simple hungry or tired Vanessa had learned to recognize, but something deeper, layered with emotion Vanessa couldn't name. Before she could pull out her phone to look up the unfamiliar signs, a man with kind eyes knelt beside them. His hands answered Ruby in the same flowing language, and her daughter's whole face transformed, lit from within in a way Vanessa hadn't seen in months. They were talking. Really talking. The kind of conversation that makes you forget the world around to you. And Vanessa realized, with a quiet ache in her chest, that she was standing on the outside of her own daughter's world. What was Ruby saying that made her smile like that? The flight to Bozeman had been Vanessa's idea, though she couldn't quite remember when desperation had turned into an actual plan. Somewhere between the third therapist who'd gently suggested she meet Ruby where she is, and the custody mediation where Preston's lawyer had used the phrase communication barriers 6 times, she'd booked 2 tickets to Montana, a week away from everything, just her and Ruby. No interpreters, no assistants, no buffer between them. The thought terrified her more than any board presentation ever had. Ruby sat cross-legged in the uncomfortable airport chair, her purple backpack shaped like a turtle resting against her feet. She'd had that backpack since she was 4, and despite Vanessa's attempts to buy her newer, more age-appropriate things, Ruby refused to let it go. The fabric was worn thin in places, one of the straps carefully stitched where it had torn last summer. Vanessa had done that repair herself, late one night at the kitchen table, watching a YouTube tutorial with the sound off so she wouldn't wake Ruby. It was one of the few times she'd felt like she was doing something right. The airport terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of a Friday afternoon. Families headed to ski resorts, business travelers hunched over laptops, a group of college students already celebrating something with overpriced beers from the bar across the concourse. Ruby watched them all with the careful attention she gave everything, her dark eyes taking in details Vanessa probably missed. She'd always been observant, even as a baby. The pediatrician had noticed it first, the way 6-month-old Ruby would track movement, but startle at vibrations instead of sounds. By her first birthday, they had the diagnosis: profound bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. Vanessa had memorized every syllable of those words, as if understanding the medical terminology would somehow make it easier. It hadn't, but they'd adapted. Vanessa had thrown herself into learning American Sign Language with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She'd hired a deaf tutor, bought every book and app available, even joined a parent support group that met Tuesday evenings. For the first year, she'd been diligent, determined. She'd signed everything, narrated their days in ASL, filled their home with visual cues and vibrating alerts. Preston had tried, too, for a while. But where Vanessa saw ASL as a language to master, Preston saw it as a temporary solution until they could fix the problem. The arguments had started small. Should they pursue a cochlear implant? How much speech therapy versus ASL immersion? Was it fair to raise Ruby in what Preston called a limited world? Looking back, Vanessa could see that the marriage had ended long before the divorce papers were filed. They'd just been signing different languages at each other, neither one really listening. Now, watching Ruby's hands move in patterns she only partially understood, Vanessa felt the full weight of her failures. She'd learned ASL, yes, enough to manage daily routines, enough to ask if Ruby wanted apples or oranges, if she'd finished her homework, if she was tired or cold or needed the bathroom. Functional language, survival language. But somewhere in the chaos of building her company from a startup to a firm worth 8 figures, she'd stopped progressing, stopped learning the nuance, the poetry, the emotional depth that turned simple signs into real conversation. She'd told herself it was fine. Ruby had interpreters at school. They used text messages and FaceTime. They communicated, but there was a difference between communicating and connecting. And Vanessa was only now beginning to understand the canyon between them. Ruby's hands stilled, and she looked up at her mother with a question in her eyes. Vanessa recognized the sign for where, and something about time, but the rest blurred together too quickly. She pulled out her phone, ready to type a response, when a shadow fell across them. "Excuse me," a voice said, warm and slightly rough around the edges. "I couldn't help but notice." Vanessa looked up to find a man standing a respectful distance away, maybe early 40s, with graying brown hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of time spent outdoors. He wore jeans and a faded Patagonia jacket, work boots that had seen better days. Everything about him said, not from here, or at least not from the corner office world Vanessa inhabited. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Kind eyes. The kind that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which he was doing now, but not at Vanessa. At Ruby. He knelt down slowly, the way you approach a skittish cat, and brought his hands up. Vanessa watched, frozen, as his fingers moved in fluid, confident ASL. Not the careful textbook signs she'd learned, but something more natural, more alive. He was asking Ruby about her turtle backpack. Ruby's whole face lit up. Her hands flew in response, so fast Vanessa only caught fragments. Something about turtles being her favorite, about swimming, about a book she'd read. The man laughed, a genuine sound that made several nearby passengers glance over, and signed something back that made Ruby giggle silently, her small shoulders shaking with mirth. Vanessa felt something twist in her chest. When was the last time she'd made Ruby laugh like that? When was the last time they'd had a conversation that went beyond logistics and schedules? The man glanced up at her, his smile softening into something more sympathetic. "Sorry, I should have introduced myself first," he said, switching to spoken English. "I'm Cal Brennan. I saw her signing and thought I'd say hello. My daughter's deaf, too." He stood, extending a hand. Vanessa shook it automatically, her CEO instincts kicking in even as her thoughts raced. "Vanessa Reeves, and this is Ruby." "Ruby," Cal repeated, signing the name to her. "That's a beautiful name, like the stone." Ruby nodded enthusiastically and signed something elaborate. Cal's eyebrows rose. "Oh, your mom picked it?" She said because rubies are rare and precious, but also strong. Hard to break. He looked at Vanessa with a new appreciation. "That's a pretty thoughtful choice." Vanessa felt heat creep into her cheeks. She had said that, once, in the hospital room 2 hours after Ruby was born. She'd been holding her daughter, counting tiny fingers and toes, when the nurse had asked about the name. Preston had wanted something more traditional, Catherine or Elizabeth, but Vanessa had insisted on Ruby. Because rubies survived pressure, they came from deep in the earth and emerged transformed into something brilliant. She'd hoped the name would be a kind of armor. "Thank you," she managed. "Are you traveling with your daughter?" Cal shook his head, something flickering across his face too quickly to name. "No, she's back in Montana with her grandmother. I've been out here in Denver for work. Heading home now." He paused, then added, "Actually, I was wondering if you'd mind if I sat with you for a bit. The flight's delayed 90 minutes, and it's nice to meet another ASL family. My daughter doesn't get as much interaction with other deaf kids as I'd like." Vanessa should have said no. She didn't know this man. Stranger danger and all that. But Ruby was already patting the empty seat beside her, signing something that Vanessa interpreted as please, and there was something in Cal's face that seemed trustworthy. Or maybe she was just desperate for someone who could talk to her daughter the way she couldn't. "Of course," she said. "We'd love the company." Cal settled into the chair with the ease of someone comfortable in his own skin, and within seconds, he and Ruby were deep in conversation. Vanessa watched, trying to follow along, catching maybe one word in 3. Ruby was telling him about school, about her art class, about something that had happened at recess. Cal responded with the kind of attention most adults didn't give children, asking follow-up questions, reacting with genuine interest. At one point, he pulled out his phone and showed Ruby a photo. Even from her angle, Vanessa could see it was a young girl, maybe 9 or 10, grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile and her hands mid-sign. Ruby's eyes went wide, and she signed something rapid and excited. She wants to know if she can video call Isla. Cal translated, glancing at Vanessa for permission. My daughter. They're both asking if they can meet. Vanessa felt that twist in her chest again. Ruby wanted to meet another deaf child so badly that she was willing to ask a stranger's parent because she didn't have those connections in her regular life. When was the last time Ruby had mentioned friends from school? When was the last time Vanessa had arranged a playdate or asked about Ruby's social life beyond whether the interpreter said she was adjusting well? Of course, Vanessa said, her voice coming out rougher than intended. That would be wonderful. Cal set up the call with the practiced ease of someone who did this often. Within moments, a little girl's face filled the screen, her eyes the same warm brown as her father's. She saw Ruby and immediately started signing, and Ruby signed back so quickly, her hands were almost a blur. Cal held the phone steady, occasionally chiming in but mostly letting the girls talk. Vanessa watched her daughter transform. This wasn't the careful, controlled Ruby she saw at home, the one who'd learned to be patient with her mother's slow signing, who nodded and smiled even when Vanessa knew she'd missed half the meaning. This was Ruby uninhibited, Ruby fluent, Ruby fully herself. The conversation flowed for almost 15 minutes, the two girls discussing everything from favorite colors to whether dragons were real to what they wanted to be when they grew up. Isla said something that made Ruby throw her head back in silent laughter, her whole body shaking with joy. Vanessa felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes and blinked them back quickly. When they finally said goodbye, Ruby sat back with a huge smile on her face. She turned to Vanessa and signed something elaborate, her expressions animated. Vanessa caught the signs for friend, fun, and what she thought might be summer, but the rest was lost. She looked helplessly at Cal, who'd been watching the exchange with gentle patience. She's asking if she can visit Isla this summer, he translated. There's a deaf camp in Montana that Isla goes to every year. Ruby would love to go. He paused, then added carefully, she said she doesn't have any deaf friends at her school, just hearing kids who know some signs. The words hit Vanessa like a physical blow. Ruby's school had a deaf and hard of hearing program. That's why they'd chosen it. State-of-the-art equipment, certified interpreters, a small classroom of students who used ASL. But apparently, program wasn't the same as community. Apparently, her daughter had been lonely in ways Vanessa hadn't even noticed. I didn't know, she said quietly, more to herself than to Cal. About the friends, she never said. Did you ask? Cal's voice was gentle, but the question landed anyway. Vanessa opened her mouth to defend herself, then closed it. Had she asked? Really asked, in a way that invited honest conversation? Or had she just checked boxes? School good? Homework done? Any problems? All questions that could be answered with simple yes or no, with signs she definitely knew. She'd been conducting a daily status meeting with her 6-year-old daughter instead of actually talking to her. Before she could spiral further into self-recrimination, her phone buzzed. Preston's name flashed on the screen. She silenced it without looking at the message. He'd been calling and texting all day, ever since she'd told him about the Montana trip. Not asked. Told. Because legally, she didn't need his permission for a week-long vacation, and she was tired of asking for approval to be a parent. The phone buzzed again. Then again. Cal glanced at it, then back at Vanessa, his expression carefully neutral. Sorry. she muttered. My ex. He's not happy about the trip. The Montana trip. Vanessa nodded. He thinks I'm being impulsive, that Ruby needs routine and stability, not adventures. She didn't add the rest of what Preston had said, that Vanessa was compensating for guilt with grand gestures, that she should spend less time planning exotic vacations and more time actually learning to communicate with their daughter, that he was considering filing for primary custody because Ruby deserved a parent who could actually understand her. Cal made a thoughtful sound. Does Ruby like routine and stability? It was such a simple question that Vanessa almost laughed. Did Ruby like routine? She had no idea. Her daughter ate the same breakfast every morning, followed the same bedtime ritual, wore the same purple turtle backpack every day. But was that preference or just learned behavior? Was that Ruby being Ruby, or Ruby being what she thought she was supposed to be? I don't know, Vanessa admitted, and the honesty of it felt like defeat. Cal didn't respond right away. He watched Ruby, who was now drawing something on her tablet, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that Ruby wouldn't have caught it even if she could hear. My wife left when Isla was 2, he said. Said she couldn't handle having a special needs kid. He made air quotes around the phrase, his mouth twisting slightly. I was working corporate back then. Big firm, bigger salary, impossible hours. I'd come home after Isla was asleep and leave before she woke up. Convinced myself I was providing for her, that it was enough. He paused, his hands clasping and unclasping in his lap. Then one day my wife was just gone. Left a note, said she'd tried, but she wasn't cut out for this life, and since I was never around anyway, I could figure it out. Vanessa stared at him, horror and sympathy warring in her chest. Cal, I'm so sorry. He shrugged, but there was old pain in the gesture. Best thing that ever happened to me, actually. Worst at the time, but best in the long run. I quit my job. Became a carpenter. Flexible hours, enough money to get by, and I got to be there. Really there. I learned ASL like my life depended on it, because Isla's life did depend on it. Her happiness, her sense of self, her connection to the world. All of it ran through these. He held up his hands. I made mistakes. God, so many mistakes. But I learned that being present isn't the same as being there. You can be in the same room and miles apart. The words settled over Vanessa like a heavy blanket. She thought about her penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art, about Ruby's bedroom with every educational toy and adaptive technology money could buy, about the interpreters and therapists and tutors she'd hired to give her daughter every advantage. She'd built an empire and called it love. She'd confused providing with parenting. I've been present, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm there for breakfast. I check her homework. I sign what I can. Cal nodded slowly. I believe you. But can you tell me what Ruby's favorite color is? Vanessa's mind went blank. Purple, obviously. The backpack, her bedroom walls, half her clothes. Purple, she said with confidence. Cal smiled and signed something to Ruby, who'd looked up from her tablet. Ruby's hands moved in response, and she giggled silently. Cal looked back at Vanessa. She says her favorite color used to be purple, but now it's teal, like the ocean. She changed her mind 4 months ago after you took her to the aquarium. 4 months ago. Vanessa remembered that day. A Saturday, rare, unscheduled time, and she'd suggested the aquarium on a whim. Ruby had been mesmerized by the jellyfish tank, pressing her hands against the glass, her eyes wide with wonder. Vanessa had taken photos, posted one to Instagram with a caption about quality time, then spent most of the visit responding to work emails on her phone. She hadn't noticed her daughter falling in love with a new color. Cal must have seen something in her face because he reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. Hey, you're here now. You're trying. That's what matters. But Vanessa wasn't sure that was enough. Trying felt like a participation trophy when Ruby deserved a gold medal. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she looked. 3 new messages from Preston, each one more insistent than the last. The last one made her stomach clench. "If you get on that plane, I'm filing an emergency custody motion Monday morning. Ruby needs a parent who can actually communicate with her, and we both know that's not you." Vanessa stared at the words until they blurred. The terrible thing was that Preston wasn't entirely wrong. She couldn't communicate with Ruby. Not really. Not in the way that counted. She could manage. She could get by. But she couldn't connect. Cal was saying something, but Vanessa's ears were ringing. She stood abruptly, mumbling an excuse about needing the bathroom, and walked blindly toward the restrooms on the far side of the concourse. Inside, she locked herself in a stall and let herself breathe. Just breathe. The walls pressed in. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere outside, a baby was crying, the sound muffled and distant. Vanessa pressed her forehead against the cool metal door and tried to remember why she'd thought Montana was a good idea. She'd imagined long hikes where words didn't matter, just shared silence and natural beauty. She'd imagined hotel rooms with room service and movies with subtitles, Ruby's favorite kind. She'd imagined somehow, magically, becoming the mother Ruby deserved just by changing location. But you couldn't outrun your inadequacies. You couldn't fix 6 years of missed connections with 1 week in Big Sky country. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Preston, this one just a screenshot of a legal document. He wasn't bluffing. He really was going to fight for custody. And maybe he should. Maybe Ruby would be better off with a father who, whatever his faults, had at least been honest about his limitations. Preston had never pretended to be something he wasn't. He'd said from the beginning that he didn't think ASL was necessary, that technology and medical interventions were the future, that Ruby could live a normal life if they just tried hard enough. Vanessa had fought him on it, had insisted on ASL immersion, on deaf culture, on raising Ruby to be proud of who she was. But she'd been a hypocrite. She'd championed ASL while never becoming truly fluent. She'd insisted on deaf community while never actually connecting Ruby to other deaf children. She'd built a philosophy she believed in and then failed to live it. A knock on the stall door made her jump. "Occupied," she called out. The knock came again, more insistent. Vanessa unlocked the door, ready to snap at whoever couldn't read social cues, and found Cal standing there, in the women's bathroom, looking deeply uncomfortable but determined. "You can't be in here," she said automatically. "I know. Ruby was worried. She saw your face before you left." He shifted his weight. "Look, I don't know what's going on, and you don't have to tell me, but that kid out there loves you. I've been watching her watch you, and she looks at you like you hung the moon. Whatever you think you're failing at, she doesn't see it that way." Vanessa laughed, but it came out harsh and broken. "She doesn't see it because she's 6 and I'm all she has. But she deserves better. She deserves someone who can actually talk to her, who understands when she's excited or scared or angry, who doesn't need a translation app for their own daughter." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Her father's right. I'm not enough. I thought I could be. I thought love and money and good intentions would be enough. But they're not. She needs someone fluent, someone present, someone who isn't me." Cal was quiet for a long moment. A woman tried to enter the bathroom, saw him, and backed out quickly with a muttered apology. He barely noticed. "Can I tell you something about Isla?" he finally said. "When she was 4, she asked me why I talked funny. Funny because my ASL was still rough back then. I was learning, but I wasn't fluent. I made mistakes. I signed things backwards, confused similar signs, couldn't keep up with her when she got excited. And I had this moment of panic, thinking I was failing her, that she needed a deaf parent, or at least a fluent one. And all she had was me stumbling through." He smiled, but there was old pain in it. You know what she said when I tried to apologize? She said, "Daddy talks with his heart. That's my favorite language." Vanessa felt something crack in her chest. Ruby deserves someone who can talk with both their heart and their hands. Maybe. Cal conceded. Or maybe she just deserves someone who's willing to keep learning, to keep trying, to show up even when it's hard. Kids don't need perfect, Vanessa. They need present. They need effort. They need to know they matter enough for you to struggle. He stepped back toward the door, checking to make sure no one was coming in. That flight to Montana, that's effort. That's you showing up. Don't let fear or guilt or your ex-husband's threats convince you it doesn't count. He left before Vanessa could respond, slipping out of the bathroom with a murmured apology to the woman still waiting outside. Vanessa looked at herself in the mirror. Mascara smudge, designer blouse wrinkled, CEO armor cracking at the seams. She looked like someone who'd lost their way, or maybe someone who was finally finding it. She washed her face, straightened her shoulders, and walked back out to gate 23. Ruby saw her coming, and her whole face brightened. She signed something quick and worried. Vanessa recognized okay and mom, and something that might have been sad. She knelt down in front of her daughter's chair and signed slowly, carefully, using the words she did know. I'm okay. I love you. I'm sorry. Ruby's small hands came up, and she signed back with the kind of patience that broke Vanessa's heart. Slow, clear signs that her mother could follow. I love you too. Don't be sorry. You're here. Such simple words. Such profound grace. Vanessa pulled her daughter into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling the solid warmth of her small body. Ruby wrapped her arms around Vanessa's neck and squeezed tight, and for a moment, words didn't matter at all. When they pulled apart, Cal was sitting a polite distance away, studiously examining his phone to give them privacy. Ruby tugged on Vanessa's sleeve and signed something, then pointed at her tablet. Vanessa looked. Ruby had drawn a picture, bright colors and careful detail. 3 figures standing together, a woman, a man, and a little girl with a purple backpack. Above them, Ruby had written in careful letters, "My new friend and his girl and me." That's beautiful, sweetheart, Vanessa said, signing the words as best she could. Ruby beamed and signed something else. Too fast. Vanessa looked helplessly at Cal, who glanced over and smiled. She wants to know if you'll learn to sign faster, he translated, so you can keep up with her stories. She has a lot of stories to tell you. Yes? Vanessa said out loud, then signed it clearly. Yes, I'll learn. I promise. And this time, she meant it. Not as a box to check or a skill to acquire, but as a bridge to build. A language to learn, not with her head, but with her heart. The boarding announcement crackled overhead. Flight 237 to Bozeman, Montana, now boarding all zones. Passengers began gathering their belongings, forming the usual chaotic line. Cal stood and extended his hand to Vanessa. Looks like we're on the same flight. Vanessa took his hand, felt the calluses earned through years of working with wood, of building things with patience and care. Looks like we are. Ruby grabbed her turtle backpack and slipped her hand into her mother's free one. The 3 of them walked toward the gate together, an unlikely trio bound by circumstance and language, and the shared understanding that love sometimes means learning to speak in ways you never expected. As they handed over boarding passes, Vanessa's phone buzzed one more time. Preston, undoubtedly. Another threat, another demand, another reminder of everything she was doing wrong. She silenced it without looking and dropped the phone into her bag. For the next week, she was unreachable. For the next week, she was just a mother with her daughter, learning to listen in the spaces between words. And maybe, if she was very lucky, learning to speak the language her daughter had been using all along, the one that said, "I see you, I hear you. You matter enough for me to try." The plane lifted off into a Colorado sunset, golden light streaming through the windows. Ruby pressed her face to the glass, watching the ground fall away, her hands already moving in excited signs about clouds and birds and the tiny cars below. Vanessa watched her daughter's hands, really watched them, seeing not just movements, but meaning. Not just signs, but stories. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't reach for her phone or her work or any of the 1,000 distractions she usually hid behind. She just reached for Ruby's hand and held on, two people speaking different languages but finally beginning to understand each other. Cal, sitting across the aisle, caught her eye and nodded once. A small gesture of solidarity, of recognition, of one parent to another saying, "You're doing it, keep going." And Vanessa thought maybe, just maybe, she finally was.